you guys, your experiences. So we'll start with a quick agenda of identifying the anti-patterns that that you're interested in, and then we'll prioritize those anti-patterns and then just talk about those. We may not get to all the topics because there's so many. Top 10 is just something that's arbitrary. But what Ishan has done is he has gathered all this data from all of you, and we found that there's like top 5, I think, based on your interest, the registrants who have said, I'm interested in learning about anti-patterns of a Scrum Master or sprint planning. So we'll prioritize those. Based on that, what I have seen is Scrum Master and sprint planning, product owner, product backlog refinement, and sprint. I think these are the 5 top that came about. But maybe, we'll just do a poll at some point quickly and also find out, because we had 200 registrants and we probably are now close to, 50, 60 people have joined so far, maybe more. But let's get started. So if you look at I just want to quickly give you a brief introduction about myself. Ishan has done a great job, but I also have my Twitter handle as well as my LinkedIn. If you want to get in touch with me, if you want to connect with me, please do so. I have more than 30 years of experience, obviously adjunct faculty at Penn State University as well, but I'm also a technical person. So that's about me. I live with my wife and 3 kids in the US, in Pennsylvania. So let's quickly get to the agenda. I just want to talk about what an anti-pattern is. You may have a different meaning of what an anti-pattern means, or what that means, but then we'll talk about that quickly. We'll also talk about rare and mnemonic and the actual anti-patterns, and how are we going to fix those things? How to avoid those things is the most important thing. So what is an anti-pattern? You might have heard the phrase Scrum smells, or is it a dysfunction, or something where we are saying that we try to solve a problem by providing a solution which feels that, this is out of the box. Maybe, hey, maybe I have this great idea, which is good, but anti-pattern is frequently used, but it's an ineffective solution to a problem. So based on the core principles and values of Scrum, and if you try to tweak that and see that you might get good results or something like that, that might result in an anti-pattern, because we all know that Scrum has these events and artifacts and roles and also rules, right? These are the rules of Scrum. According to the Scrum Guide, if you look at the Scrum Guide, they say that the rules, roles, artifacts, and events, these are all the things that bind the Scrum team together, right? You want to make sure that the rules are like a glue that puts everything together, make sure that you're enacting Scrum correctly. Okay, so a mnemonic that I use is rare. Scrum has rules, Scrum has artifacts. So the artifacts of Scrum, obviously, we are talking about the 3 artifacts, the roles which Scrum Master, product owner, and the development team. And events, sprint itself is an event, which is a container. So the time box that we are talking about. And we are also talking about sprint planning, the daily Scrum, sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. So as you can see, the rules of Scrum bind together the events, roles, and artifacts, governing the relationships and interaction between them, right? So that's where, when these interactions are happening, and when all of these relationships are interacting together, that's when you might have this anti-patterns develop, because even though something is suggested in the Scrum guide and then the interpretation may be incorrect, you might get into an anti-pattern. So I guess that's something that we just talked about, which is Scrum has all these rules and artifacts and roles and events. So what I want to do is, before I get into the ScrumMaster anti-patterns, I want Ishan, if you don't mind, posting a poll about the first question that we had, or the first poll that we want to do on what kind of anti-patterns do you see are the top ones that you see in your organization or in your experience?
Sure. I think all the participants must be able to see the question. You may go ahead and answer it.
Yeah, so what topic on anti-pattern is your highest interest in?
Seems like a good response. Out of 67, we have almost 50 responses.
Okay.
Let me wait a couple more minutes. Sorry, not more minutes. I'm sorry. A few more seconds. Then I will end the poll.
Sure.
Yeah, we have over 75% response. Well, I'll request you all once again, if anybody wants to contribute to the poll, to the answer, please do it now. I would be ending the poll right now, shortly. Okay, so we have almost 80% response rate. I'm closing it. Thank you all.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So it looks like Scrum Master is 35%, sprint planning is close 24%, and all topics are fascinating, which is 22%. So it's interesting that it's in the same order of interest that people have registered for. So we'll go in this order. We might first get into Scrum Master, then talk about sprint planning, product owner, and then get to the other topics like product backlog refinement and sprint. So that's a great idea. So let me quickly get into sprint. I meant to say Scrum Master anti-patterns. So one of the anti-patterns that I have seen in my experience is that Scrum Masters who come from different backgrounds, like, for example, coming from a managerial background or project manager, or coming from a position of authority, tend to do this, which is directing and assigning the work to the development team. So if you see that it's I need to assign tasks to the development team, that's an anti-pattern, because Scrum Master's role is of a servant leader, a person who assists the team in making sure that they become self-organizing and cross-functional. I know some of these words, if they mean something new, please go ahead and look up some of the information, either in the Scrum guide or any of the blog posts that you may encounter on the net. But essentially, self-organizing teams, development teams are self-organizing, so they don't need to have the work to be assigned, right? They can do it themselves. As a team, they collaborate and make sure that they get the work done. So that's an anti-pattern. So we want to avoid this anti-pattern as much as possible. So Scrum Master, how do we fix it? So Scrum Masters need to understand that the goal of the Scrum Master is to make sure that the team becomes self-organizing and cross-functional. So losing that command and control approach, making sure of you let go and then you empower teams, right? That's the most important thing for a Scrum Master to avoid this anti-pattern. The other thing that I have seen from a Scrum Master point of view is if you see that the Scrum Master protects the team. Protecting the team means that making sure that the team is not disturbed by outside influences. The team is in a safe environment where they can do the work, they can focus on the work that they have on hand. So it means that the Scrum Master needs to make sure that how do I protect the team? So for example, I would say when the team, let's say they're doing their work in the sprint and they try to overcommit to the work that they have during sprint planning. That's when the Scrum Master can ensure that they don't overcommit to the work and make sure that they're reasonable. So it's not like the Scrum Master is telling them, but the Scrum Master is ensuring that they understand, or at least tell them that, hey, you may be overcommitting. Last sprint, you guys have you have done maybe 10 backlog items, product backlog items, and this time if you're accepting 20 product backlog items, that may be too much. Just think about it, right? So it's suggesting, not like dictating. There again, the same thing is just not directing, dictating. It's just suggesting. So the other thing that's important for a Scrum Master is also to ensure that, but protecting the team is also about the team doesn't get complacent, right? If, let's say, the same example that we have taken about this team has done 10 product backlog items last sprint, or maybe on an average, and all of a sudden they try to take only 3 product backlog items, then there may be something wrong. So the Scrum Master needs to intervene, or at least just mention to them saying that, hey, you want to make sure that don't become too complacent, right? This is important to find that balance between the teams. Now, the other thing is handling multiple teams or roles. So a lot of organizations have this pressure of ensuring that, the Scrum Master can be working on multiple teams. They can maybe, can you be a Scrum Master for like 4 teams? And that's too much. A good Scrum Master is someone who may be working on 2 teams. The Scrum Guide doesn't really suggest anything, but they say that it's the dedication. It's a dedicated team, right? But we want to make sure that don't work on too many things, because you lose the focus, and the productivity of the Scrum Master itself goes down quite a bit. So they won't be able to pay attention to all the teams that they're working on. And also sometimes I've also seen this where Scrum Masters work as either product owners, or maybe even I used to be a developer before, so I'll start coding as well as being a Scrum Master. That's another multiple roles that they are playing there. That's also something that you need to avoid as much as possible, because you get into these anti-patterns, and that's not a good thing. The main focus of the Scrum Master is to help the team remove impediments. And if the Scrum Master is not paying attention to the impediments that the team brings up, then they are not serving the team correctly. So it's important that the Scrum Master ensures that they pay attention to the impediments. They ensure that the impediments are removed. That is, an impediment to the progress of the work that the team is doing. Again, I think the most important thing is the Scrum Master, as we said, is a servant leader, right? A servant leader is someone who serves without having any personal interest in the outcome. right? So they want to make sure that you serve the team and the organization. So it's not like, I'm not really, into it. So genuinely serving the team, making sure that the team is there. They can lean on, everyone can lean on the Scrum Master. So when I say organization, the Scrum Master is not just serving the team that they have, but they can also participate in other things that is related to Scrum, because they are someone who promotes Scrum within the organization. So it's important that the Scrum Master, serves in that role to make sure that if there's um, any gaps or any place where the the Scrum Master needs to serve, that can be done as well. The other important aspect of a Scrum Master is helping the product owner with product backlog refinement. So I know that the product owner is the one who has all the product backlog items. They refine it, they talk to the stakeholders, they talk to the development team. Product backlog refinement happens at several stages. It's an ongoing activity. But there may be techniques that the product owner is not aware of, or maybe there's something that I, as a Scrum Master, have learned this new technique, or I've heard about it, and I want to facilitate that. That's something that the Scrum Master needs to do this on an ongoing basis, because at the end of the day, ultimately, we need to have a healthy backlog, and that product backlog needs to be refined to the extent where, when we get into the sprint planning meeting, everything needs to be like ready. Not everything, not the entire product backlog, but I'm just saying that the product backlog needs to be ready so that we can take on the work that needs to get into the sprint planning, right? So these are all some of the things that we look at from Scrum Master Anti-Patterns. There may be more. So if you think of any other Scrum Master Anti-Patterns, please do jot down something. Just take 30 seconds at this point. Think about it and write it down on a piece of paper or in your notebook. And we'll do another poll about Scrum Master soon after that. Let's take 30 seconds first and then do that. All right, that's about 30 seconds now. So what I want you to do is either share this anti-pattern that you just learned with one of your colleagues when you get back to work, or just kind of share that at some point, if you think of any of these new anti-patterns, or I have a quick discussion with your colleagues. And also share anything that we have on the screen here that you may want to jot down. I think these slides will be available at some point, or this recording is also available, so you may want to listen to it if you want to. So Ishan, do you want to post the poll for the Scrum Master question?
Sure, I'll do that. Raj, the question was what is most quality or characteristics that is important for you in Scrum Master role? That is the one, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Just there you go.
All right, select what is the most important quality, I guess, that is missing, but important quality or characteristic that is, I guess, important for you in a Scrum Master role is there. So there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just your opinion here.
All right, so we have reached almost 80% of the response rate.
Okay.
Out of 75, we have 60 people who have answered. So, rest of the people, if you would like to answer, please go ahead and do it now. I will be closing the poll shortly. All right, I think I'll go ahead and close the poll. Give me a second. Seems to be a problem. Just give me. Yeah. There you go.
All right. So looks like a great coach. 23% of you have said that it needs to be a great coach. I totally agree. It's important to have be good coach, be available to the team. Amazing facilitation skills, because this is something where the Scrum Master is not in a position to tell anyone what to do, right? We said, do not dictate. So having these facilitation skills makes a big difference. They don't have an interest in the outcome, but how do you facilitate to make sure they are impartial in making sure that they get that done? Teach and promote Scrum. That is important, because if you're living by the rules of Scrum, living by the values of Scrum, and making sure that you're doing correctly, then these anti-patterns won't really arise. A humble person. It's important to have that humility. So a person who is humble and willing to help makes a big difference when you work in a team. So this is great. All right, so let's close this one. One of the questions that I quickly read, and if we don't get to all the questions, we will definitely get to it at some point. Either please email it to Ishan or me, and then we'll try to have like a conversation afterwards, or maybe via an email as well, or maybe post it on the website. The question about Murali B had posted something saying that who would who would tell them if the team is not picking the stories while they're working on, what would happen? Who would assign the work to them, right? So that's a great question. Sometimes people may not be like, I'm so used to like my project manager assigning work to me. So I'll wait until someone assigns my work to me. So a great Scrum Master would always get into that mode of saying that, okay, when you're doing your sprint planning, that's when you let the team make that decision. They need to assign the work themselves. And initially that may be a problem, or maybe some of the challenges that may happen. But as the team is forming, storming, norming, performing, those 4 stages of just the way that the teams form, eventually it should work out. But the team needs to work together collaboratively to ensure that happens. All right, moving on to the sprint planning anti-patterns. So sprint planning anti-patterns is something where when the sprint planning is the first meeting that happens in a sprint, right? So that's when, as soon as the sprint starts, the sprint planning starts. And when you're in planning, obviously you want to make sure that everything, all the data points that you need are something that needs to be checked for. So team members, because let's say, for example, you have a 2-week sprint, you want to make sure what is the team member availability. How many, let's say if there's a holiday, if there's a PTO, or maybe somebody is going to training, all of those things need to be taken into account. So the Scrum Master needs to ensure that the team members are, checking their availability is important. If you don't check the availability, the problem with that is that you feel that there's a lot more capacity from a team's point of view. Because even if someone's time is not accounted for, it feels like you may have a lot more time, and then you're setting up the team for failure. So you want to make sure you check that. The other thing is that capacity planning. How much capacity do we have during this sprint? That's something that you need to look at. Like, how much can we do, accomplish during the sprint? So based on different factors, you need to ensure that capacity planning happens. The third one that I have here is not validating if the product backlog is refined. What does that mean? It means that the product backlog is something, like we mentioned before, it's refined on an ongoing basis. But before we get into the sprint planning meeting, we want to make sure that the sprint backlog is refined and we have enough product backlog items in the product backlog for the team to work on. It's not like, if we are starting to refine the product backlog in the sprint planning meeting, that's an anti-pattern, right? Because you're wasting all the time that you could have spent on sprint planning in product backlog refinement. There may be still discussions going on about the product backlog, but that doesn't mean that you're actually sitting there and then doing the product backlog refinement. So you need to use these events that you have in Scrum to the most beneficial way to get the work done. So sprint planning, use it for sprint planning. If you have product backlog refinement, you want to make sure that you use that in the product backlog refinement meeting so that you're ready for sprint planning. Too detailed planning. Sometimes what happens is that people tend to get too much of detail. Let's say you have a 2-week sprint that you're working on and you're putting in too much emphasis and too much of design, because that is something, an anti-pattern. Because don't look for perfection, right? You want to make sure that planning is something just enough for you to go back and start doing your work. And that is important. So getting too detailed with estimates, getting too detailed on the tasks, so that's not really important. A lot of people tend to say, oh, these are the number of hours that we need to spend on this particular story. The estimation is like, we have set the story points. If you're using story points, you're saying that this is an 8 or a 13. And people get hung up on those things. So that is really not important. You have to make sure that the important thing is that you have enough information, clarified product backlog items, then asking questions, having that discussion with the product owner and the stakeholders. All of those things are important for you rather than spending too much time on planning. And too little of planning is also not good, right? So you want to make sure that you balance your planning in such a way. Focus on the two aspects of sprint planning. What are we going to build and how are we going to build on it, right? So those are the two that you need to balance your time between and in sprint planning and make sure that you plan accordingly. So that comes with experience. Sometimes, I don't understand estimation, maybe I made a mistake last time. So those are all the things that you need to talk about it in your sprint retrospective so that you don't repeat some of these mistakes or improve on the process and things like that in the future. That's like, obviously sprint retrospective might have its own anti-patterns, but I'm saying that that's where you need to address if you have any of these anti-patterns that they develop. A lot of teams forget to craft a sprint goal. I said, maybe at the end here, but what I mean by that is sprint goal is set something soon after, what what are we going to build, right? The product owner and the team together come up with a sprint goal, and it's maybe a small one paragraph, one sentence, small sentence, but what are we building during this sprint goal, right? Something like for example, we are going to build the add and delete cart for the e-commerce website that we have for this sprint, right? That's the goal to have, because it gives you the coherent functionality that the team is looking for. Because if you're working on different pieces of the product, that may not be the best way of using the team's talent. The creativity and everything comes in handy when you have your sprint goal that is working on coherent functionality. So that's important to have that. But crafting that sprint goal is absolutely essential or important for the team. A lot of times what happens is product owners may dictate, or product owners may say, this is how I want you to build the product. So the rules of Scrum, obviously you want to make sure that the development team is empowered to make their decisions about how, right? The what can be dictated, or at least the what can be decided by the product owner, but the how is something that the team, the development team owns. They are empowered. The organization has empowered the development team to make decisions on how they're going to build their products. So that is important, that the development team understands that, and they say, and the Scrum Master also can point out at that point of time, if a product owner is being aggressive and trying to dictate that, right? We also talked about that overcommitting, right? When we talked about the sprint, the Scrum Master role. So overcommitting to work or even becoming complacent is not a good thing. So like we said, it's important that the Scrum Master brings that up. But having that, making sure that we look at data, if the Scrum Master is showing that data, look for that close cues or clues, and ensure that the teams don't overcommit. That doesn't mean that you're also undercommitting, like we said, right? So sprint planning is very, very important. So there may be a lot of different other anti-patterns that you may have observed in your experience. So what I want you to do is to quickly take 30 seconds of your time and write down one important anti-pattern that you see on this list here for you, and write down one sentence that as to how you are going to fix it. And if you have any other anti-pattern that you have seen, write that down, and how you're going to fix it, and maybe you can share that with another colleague at some point. So let's take 30 seconds for this, please.
Raj, just to inform you, we do have certain questions in the chat section. We will be answering these questions probably at the end of the session. But then to refer, you can check out the questions.
Okay. That Q&A, right?
Yeah, Q&A and also the chat section.
Okay. All right, so let's stop writing. And Ishan, do you want to quickly talk about the poll for sprint planning, or post it?
Yes, right away. The question is, what is important for a product owner to be successful? Right?
No. Do you have anything for sprint planning or no?
That is, which event in your experience have you seen a lot of anti-patterns in?
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe can we post that?
Sure, definitely. Yes, there you go.
Yep. All right, let's answer this question. Question 3.
Okay, so we're done with 1 minute. We have 70% of response rate. And yes, I would like to request those who have not yet answered, kindly answer the question so that we can close it and share the results with you all. Okay, so we have almost 75% of answer rate, response rate. Closing
Okay.
the poll. Yes.
Okay. Interesting that we have sprint planning, and in the descending order that is actually put here. So 31% daily Scrum, 15, 12%. So yeah, in my experience, what I have seen is there's a lot of anti-patterns that are possible in daily Scrum. This is just my experience, but that's because even though it's a 15-minute meeting, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in there. But I wanted to take one question that I quickly read. Sorry that we may have to take some of the questions at the end, but because the question was asked about the product owner dictating. What do you mean by dictating? The product owner dictating um, the team to do the work, right? So what I mean by that is many times, what in my experience, what I've seen is product owners who may have technical knowledge, product owners who may even have just the product knowledge, they want the team to build it in a certain way, or they say, I want you to build it by using like one of these modules, or I want you to the team to use HTML instead of using this, right? So it's kind of like directly telling them how to do the work. So as long as they just don't interfere too much on the solution, leave the solution to the team as to how they are going to develop. So that's what I mean by when I say product owner is, sorry, they're dictating the how, right? So leave it to the team. Okay, moving on to the product owner anti-patterns. So we have 20 more minutes and we have 3 more topics. So let's see if we can cover all of those and then also the questions. But let's talk about the product owner anti-patterns. The product owner's role is, all the roles are crucial and important for a Scrum team. But product owner's availability is very, very important. In my experience, if the product owner has limited availability or not available to the team is not successful. The reason being, the product owner is the person, very important person to share their knowledge with the development team to ensure that the right product is built and building it right. So if they are not available, they are spending a lot more time outside of the Scrum team, then if there's any questions they are not addressed by the product owner, then you may have an inferior product being built. So it's important that product owner is available to the team. So the three things that are important for a product owner's role is having the product knowledge. Is very important, right? Because they are the authority on the product as in terms of what the product does and what the product vision is all about. And also authority, availability, and knowledge. These are the three key things that the product owner needs to have as their characteristics to be successful. So product owners need to make a conscious effort to be available to the team. If something like that happens, the Scrum Master can suggest to the product owner saying, and the team needs you, whatever it takes to make sure that the product owner spends time with the development team. So a great product owner, can be, make their own decisions to say that I need to be available to my team. So they spend a lot more time with the team. Not sharing the product vision with the Scrum team. Vision is something very, very important to be crafted by the product owner for the product itself. You might have your corporate vision, but the product vision is something that every product needs to have. So once you have the product vision crafted, this also needs to be aligned with the product, with the corporate vision or the corporate goals. So not just sharing this vision with the senior executives and leaders, but the product owner must share this vision with the Scrum team. A Scrum team that knows about the product vision, where they are heading, is very, very important, so that the Scrum team can be creative and make sure that they are aligned with the product vision and the product owner in general. It's almost like, product owner is a visionary who is like the driver of this car, who knows where exactly they need to get to, right? They're a visionary who said, okay, now I'm behind the wheel, I know where I need to head to. But sharing that with the team and saying that this is where we are heading to makes it all the more fun and interesting and important. A product owner, again, goes back to availability. Skipping the Scrum meetings. If they are not present in a sprint planning meeting, imagine the sprint planning meeting is not going to be worthwhile. So the product owner shouldn't be skipping these meetings. There's no specific rules around daily Scrum or the product. The daily Scrum is for the development team. But I have seen product owners come to daily Scrum meetings, even though they are not directly participating. It is very important for them to go to the daily Scrum as well, so that they know exactly what is happening every single day on the product, what the team is working on that particular day. So I would encourage my product owners always to say, please try to attend the daily Scrum. But any meeting that is skipped by the product owner, I think you're undermining the value of the product that we are building. So it's important to have that collaboration and attend the Scrum meetings. Again, I think this is something that in the previous slide, the same anti-pattern you said, dictating the team, right? But maybe a little bit softer here, saying that telling the team how to create a product increment. How are we going to create? So that's not something that is useful. So you want to make sure that leave the how to the development team, just focus on the what. And if you have any, if the development team has any questions, the product owner may answer those questions at that point, right? So ensuring that these things don't happen in the beginning is important, but awareness of all of these anti-patterns is key, right? Many times while we are working, we don't understand, why somebody is coming up with these anti-patterns, because they feel like going back to my old habits, this is the way we were working before, and trying to just use that as a solution is not a good thing, because it creates anti-patterns, and you may feel that there is a solution, but there is no solution. Actual solution is not being built correctly. Then you're doing Scrum incorrectly, right? So that's important to have. All right, so product owner I want you to please take 30 seconds to write down any anti-patterns that you may have encountered as a product owner, or you have seen your product owners do in your organization. Just quickly, one thing that you have noticed, and then we'll do another poll. Okay, Ishan, do you mind posting that?
Sure, the final question. Yes, here it goes.
What is important for a product owner to be successful?
So it's almost 1 minute with the question. We would like to request all the attendees if they would like, who have not yet answered the question, if they would like to answer the question. We have almost 70% of response rate. I would be closing the poll shortly. All right, I'm closing the poll. There you go.
All right. So 43% of the polls said that shares vision with the team. I agree with this. All of the four are important, but looks like sharing the vision is sets that that tone for the team to work on. Okay, we are working on this particular product, and where we are heading is very important. So I think that first step is important, and then the rest of it is obviously the Scrum Master, the product owner needs to be available to the team and make those decisions, and then be knowledgeable about the product. So that is great. I tried to quickly answer while you guys were taking the poll one or two questions, but like I said, we'll try to get into the other questions. So maybe let me ask one question. How do you deal with high-handedness of PO? I guess this is something where we said if the product owner is aggressive, there's definitely, a lot of things that the Scrum Master can make sure that, they have some knowledge about that, making sure that, they share that. Retrospective is another one. So it's important to understand that, transparency is a big, important thing in Scrum. So you want to ensure that you're transparent about all of those things. And if they are aggressive, this is one way of dealing with it, right? So dealing within the Scrum itself. So that's one, but this requires more discussion as well. All of these questions that you have are great questions, but they may be it might take us a long time for us to get to it. So for now, I'm going to close this to get to the next one. So Ishan, one question is, can we get all of these questions afterwards and then maybe share it somewhere on the blog post?
Yes, I can share them.
Or maybe we can email it to folks too if we have.
Definitely, I can do that.
Okay.
I can add all the questions. Yeah.
Okay, great. And also chat too. I don't know if I've gotten to any of those things yet. But
the questions from the chat?
Yeah.
Okay, I will sort them out and probably will be able to send it tomorrow.
Okay, great. All right, so please, all the participants, please look for any of the, as I'll try to answer some of the questions. It might take a little bit of time, but I'd like to get back to you on those questions if we don't have time. I see that we only have like another 7 minutes here, right? After that, we are done.
Rather, so, it's okay. You can extend it a little bit in answering the questions. And all the attendees are definitely waiting for their questions to be answered, right? So yeah, I think we can extend it.
We can extend it. Okay. Do you guys want to? One question is: do you want to stop here and just go back to the questions, because we have product backlog anti-patterns, we have sprint anti-patterns, but that's something that we had maybe 7% of the registrants have asked for. How do you want to do that? Do you want to complete these, or do you want to maybe go back to questions now?
You can post your response in the chat to all the attendees.
Sorry, say that again.
I was asking them to post it on the chat. So yeah, you can access chat, right? Raj?
Yeah.
Okay, so
complete the topic, continue, please continue. So there's a lot of extend the session. Well, okay, let's complete the presentation, because I think there's a lot of people who came here for ensuring that at least we get the questions, the anti-patterns. So they, even though there may be 7%, people may have said, okay, I want to listen to product backlog anti-patterns and the other one. So maybe we'll extending is also it's we need to end the time box, but we'll address those questions maybe via email. This is a big topic, so pardon me for that. Too much information here. Okay, let's look at product backlog anti-patterns. A lot of teams, Scrum teams, try to refine the entire product backlog, order the entire product backlog. That's an anti-pattern, right? We don't know when priorities will change, when we don't know when the order of that will change, because requirements are constantly emerging, they are changing. So it's important for the teams to just focus on the most important ones. So I normally suggest to teams to have enough product backlog refined, meaning maybe something based on your past. You say, let's just have enough product backlog refined for the next 2 sprints. Focus on the next sprint, but also have a few more that are important for you and order them for the second sprint as well. But it's not like you're going to use that, but so that in case if priorities change during sprint planning, you can just swap those and put that product backlog item in the next sprint, right? Product backlog items sliced horizontally instead of vertically. I mean, what does that mean? That means that we are putting in a lot of information where, oh, I just need to work on only horizontal, meaning, I'm going to be just doing only work for design of this user story or test user story. I think, I have something like that. Creating waterfall like user stories like design, code, test, etc. Right? So you want to have, it's almost like, eating a layered cake, right? So you have a flavor of everything. You want to do a little bit of design, a little bit of coding, a little bit of testing. So the product backlog items need to be vertically sliced so that you have a flavor of all of the things that need to be done so that it's valuable to the user, right? So this is an anti-pattern. Do not do stories that are like design only, code only, test only, because that is like, just doing mini waterfall within a Scrum. So that's an anti-pattern. It's important to have an acceptance criteria defined, right? For this is important to have at the end of if you're using user stories, having an acceptance criteria makes it easier for the development team to go back and work on those things. Helpful for writing test cases, helpful while you're actually, when the work is done. So that it's easier to go back to the acceptance criteria and say, hey, product owner, this is what you have mentioned. Did it meet the acceptance criteria? It's almost like a checks or check boxes, like, just check off those things because it meets that criteria as that the user story is done, right? Just meeting your definition of done. That's important to have. Standard format as a user, not followed. No business value defined. I know that, it's according to the Scrum guide, it's not, you don't have to use user stories, but they are very popular, right? But if you're doing it, make sure that you follow that format. Whatever it is, it's kind of standard so that people don't get it too much into process, but as long as you have a format that you follow and that's meaningful to you, to the team, use that. For everything, you need to have the business value defined. Any product backlog item needs to have that value, order, and the priority, right? To ensure that that's defined. So product backlog items, they need to be ordered. They don't refine the entire product backlog. Just look at the top three here: 1, 2, 3. Feature 1, feature B, feature C, and then you can refine the other ones. See, the bigger ones at the bottom are at the bottom of the stack here. All right. So, Ishan, do we have one more poll?
These were the only I had actually. These are the 4 questions.
Oh, that's it. Okay. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to. So, why don't you also, guys, if you have any questions about the product backlog anti-patterns, just post them, and then we'll get to those, via email, like I said. But I'm going to move on to the next one, which is sprint anti-patterns. A lot of considerations here. The sprint needs to be not always the same length. Sometimes you don't want to do 2-week sprints this time and a 3-week sprint the next time, and so on and so forth. Only if there is a real valid reason to stick to or change that sprint length, you may have to do it once, but that's like almost like an experiment. Don't keep changing that frequently. Normally I haven't really seen any teams change the length of the sprint, and they keep it consistently because I think it kind of puts you in that rhythm. So don't change the length of the sprint arbitrarily. Changing dates. Again, I think, when you're doing, when you start on a Tuesday, I meant to say changing the day. Keep that consistently. Don't change something just because you have to, you have to make sure that, it meets certain criteria for the organization. If there is a holiday or something like that, then maybe that day will fall onto the next day. But ensure that you have that sprint days and dates correct. Don't take any breaks between sprints, because it's a hard time box. Time boxes start and end at the exact same time, right? So you don't want to have a break between sprints. Taking a time off in between or skipping a sprint is not a good idea. A lot of teams also have this anti-pattern of sprint zero. What does that mean? Before we start sprinting, we want to have a sprint zero so that we can gather all this information. So I don't know why people do this, but you need to provide some value. As long as this sprint provides value, you have already started sprinting, right? So don't do a sprint zero. Just get in with the work and start working on the sprint. Sometimes people take maybe one or two days to just get started, maybe after doing some training, maybe some setup, but just start your sprint one. The other anti-pattern that I've also observed is a hardening sprint. A hardening sprint is something where we say, let's just take one more sprint for doing some QA, or maybe some integration, or maybe some implementation. So the problem with that is, if you look at it, the product owner or the product business owners have been paying for each sprint, right? You look at it. So at that sprint, that's not valuable to them. So any functionality that is delivered at the end of each sprint is important. So don't use hardening sprints, because quality needs to be built in for each and every sprint. And that is very important. So if you don't do that, then I think you're creating unnecessary anti-patterns and more defects as you go along. All right. With that, I think we have covered the 5 anti-patterns that we talked about. And so do we would stop here and then I get back to questions in an email? Because I want to be respectful of the time of people, because people may have to travel, they have to go, because we already had taken the first 15 minutes and extended to 9:30 to, I guess 7 to 7:15 now, right? More than that.
Okay. Would like to take a vote on that from all the participants, if they are okay to extend it for next 10 minutes. If Raj, if you are okay to answer the questions for just 10 minutes, because I don't think so we have been able to answer any questions except a couple probably during the whole session. So definitely we will have a blog post for the questions where we can continue the conversation there. And
we'll take a few questions. Do you want to do a poll? Because if you get chat, probably it might take a lot of time. So yes or no?
Yes or no for the questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just see if I can create a poll for that. Okay. I don't think so I can create a poll now.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we're getting responses on chat. We can extend the time. 10 minutes, okay? 10 minutes extension is okay. So let's go with the questions from the Q&A section, Raj.
Okay, how about this? If people have to drop, let them drop, and people who are interested, do that, right?
Definitely, and everybody has a choice. If anybody wants to drop in right now, you can with your work, or else if you want to stay connected, we are here for the next 10 minutes. Okay, over to you, Raj. Quickly, we take up the questions as per your choice.
Okay. All right. So I want to look at this.
There's a hell lot of questions.
Yeah. So here, how sprint goal and sprint itself derives when a feature is too big to be done in a sprint and can distribute over 3 or 4 sprints. Does the feature to be part of the sprint goal or part of the sprint in which it's going to be completed? That's a great question.
Question by Harmanpreet Singh. That's right. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the answer is, I'm not an answer. Obviously, I'm going to just have a discussion point around this. So any time that we have features that we are developing, right? you want to make sure that when your product backlog item is small enough so that it can deliver some value. So making sure that you ensure that that product backlog item or that feature is small enough so that it delivers value at the end of each sprint. If it is spread across 4 or 5 sprints as a feature, that's okay. But as long as it has something. But when you have something where I just coded something for this particular feature, and in my next sprint I'm going to do some testing, that's not valuable to the user. So that's why we said it's important to make sure that you finish that. So it's an art of writing and making sure that that is addressed, whatever particular feature that you're working on. All right. How does one place value for a product backlog or user story? Well, when you talk about value, it could be anything that the team can come up with, right? It could be a number. I mean, I have seen a lot of teams use numbers for that. Like, you say, okay, 1 to 10 is the value, and 10 being the highest value that it provides. Or it could be anything, right? High, medium, low value, that, or if that works for you, that's fine. So there's no specific way that the Scrum Guide tells you to do that. What do you mean break between a sprint? When I say break between a sprint, let's say your sprint starts on a Tuesday and ends on a Monday, right? And then following that sprint, you're taking like 3 days off and you start your sprint on Friday. That's when is a break. So sprint needs to stop and end, and move on to like multiple sprints like that continuously without taking a holiday in between. So how does one place value? Will be really helpful if we can get the correct answer to the question posted on the poll. Should we assume that the maximum votes are the correct answer? So like I said, there's no correct answer for any of those questions that we have had. These are all poll questions where we are saying that what is your opinion about these things. So for example, I have seen a lot of anti-patterns in the daily Scrum, but some of you have seen a lot more as anti-patterns in sprint planning. So it was just to answer those kinds of questions. So nothing specific. So there's no right answer. You're all right. Do we have anti-patterns for review and retrospective? Yes, we do have these anti-patterns. I think if there is any interest in continuing more anti-patterns discussion, maybe we can do another webinar next month. There's, these are all just a soup starter, I would say. We just started, so we can have more and more of these things. So
absolutely, that would be great, Raj.
Yeah, let's do that. So, so did we answer everything on here? I think more questions are coming up now as well.
That's right.
What to do when the team has one story that is big and cannot be delivered in tasks? Then split the story, make it smaller, right? Always make sure that there's coherent functionality, but a lot of people feel that, oh, it's too big and we can't really split that. There's always a possibility, so give it a try. Talk to the product owner, make sure that it's meaningful. Each sprint has 1 or 2 features same day. Can we have sprint review and retrospective in first half of the day and sprint planning in the second half of the day? In this way, we can have full transition from one sprint to the other in a day and left full days without having Scrum ceremonies consuming half of a day. Well, that's a great question. The answer is, as long as you're consistent, just having that whole thing in a day is not, there's no suggestion from Scrum Guide saying that you have to do it this way. And I have no suggestion as well to do it this way. A lot of times what happens is that if you're in a sprint planning meeting, let's say you have 2-week sprint and you have 4 hours of sprint planning meeting, all the time boxes can end early. If you're done early, that's okay, right? So if you try to do all the ceremony, all the I shouldn't say ceremonies, because I think the technical term from Scrum point of view is events, right? So if all of those are done in a day, imagine there's so much going on in one day. So I would try to break it up a little bit so that, it's easier. You always have the same time, nine days, no matter what, right? I mean, all the full 10 days if it is a 2-week sprint. But it's just you need to have these meetings before. Otherwise, how do you plan your work? How do you get your work done? How Scrum Master will help if product owner not following the DOR to draft PBI for sprint. I don't know what DOR means. Document of requirements? I'm just guessing. Scrum Master is not directly involved in making decisions about the product backlog items. The Scrum Master is just a servant leader, right? So it's the team, it's the Scrum team together makes those decisions. How does the Scrum Master deal with undercommit and overcommit? Basically, like I mentioned, point the team to the data. Let's say, last sprint, our velocity was this, right? And this many items have been completed. And this, compared to that, will you be in a position to complete it? So Scrum Master needs to ask the question. URL definition of ready. Okay. Oh yeah. I mean, I forgot about definition of ready. DOR is, there's no specific definition of ready. I think from a Scrum guide point of view, there's only definition of done. But some teams use definition of ready, which is okay. But don't go too crazy on the definition of ready. The problem with you have to be careful when you define a definition of ready. The problem is it kind of gives the impression that these items are not ready, so the development team is not open-minded to say, oh, until these things are done, we are not going to be ready. So it's okay to have like a couple of bullet points to say the minimum we need to have is an acceptance criteria. The minimum that we need to have is a value. But if you have more than that, then you're kind of creating your rules around like the waterfall to make sure that this won't be done. Is it good from your perspective to have daily Scrum in mid of day before lunch break just because product dev wants to be the daily Scrum? Again, depends on the team, depends on how you want to talk to the team members. Sometimes, in my experience, what I've seen is the first thing that you have daily Scrum is always a good thing because you kind of start your day fresh. And it feels like, okay, let's plan the day for, what are we going to do today, right? And that gives you chances. Product dev manager, I know that's not a real, if you're talking about a product owner, then it's a different thing. But, product dev manager is maybe seems like a title within the organization. So as long as the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team figure out, when they want to have the daily Scrum, that's what is important. Do you think resource manager needed to manage the team? Great question. Again, there's no other managers needed to manage the team. The team is self-organizing. So a Scrum team basically has all the ingredients that are needed to balanced on the team to make sure that they get the work done. So they manage themselves, right? So the team does the technical work. The Scrum Master has some of the work from, all the project manager work that is done is distributed among the team members. So there's no real resource manager. Resource managers may be outside of the team, right? You might still need your, if teams are doing performance evaluations or things like that, which is also kind of changing now, then there's the team members can report to somebody outside of the Scrum team, but there's no reporting structure within the Scrum team. There's no appraisals. Again, I think, it's all about, Scrum doesn't really talk about that. It's silent, it's just whatever you have within the organization, you do that. A lot of companies are going with 180-degree reviews, performance appraisals. So I think, that's something that the team will have a say in it. Ramakrishna seems to be typing in a lot of questions. He's really enthusiastic, so thank you for that. Who will make the decision on team size? Team size is something that before the Scrum team is formed, you need to make sure that you figure out what the optimal team size is. According to the Scrum Guide, the optimal team size of a development team is anywhere from 3 to 9, right? So anything less than that or anything more than that, the team will have challenges. So you want to make sure that that decision is made based on your past historical information, how much has been accomplished. But as long as all the team members can get the work done, so that should be between that 3 and 9. And the Scrum Master and the product owner count is not included in that. So that means could be the other 2 people in there. All right, so looks like we have answered all the questions, unless I may have missed something in between. But looks like I have. So are we good now, or I don't know if we how to gather the chat questions, because if you have it there, then we may, if you find something interesting, please get that, Ishan.
Sure. I would have to, arrange there are a lot of questions there. I can definitely see they're pending, but then in the interest of time for everyone, I don't think so. We can ask them all right now. They definitely let's take this one last question from Sudipto. He has been asking this question. Raj, can you access the chat?
Yeah, this one, Sudeep.
Yeah, apart from planning poker, what other estimation techniques is asking for? Yes.
Yeah, so planning, other estimating techniques, basically just either sizing, right? Just sizing based on numbers, sizing based on t-shirts. T-shirt sizing is also another way. The challenge with t-shirt sizing is it's not something that if you want to gather that information and collect it, you have to tie it back to a number, so that you're using some sort of a tool like Jira or Rally or something. You want to make sure that you do that. So other than that, it's just planning estimation is for the sake of estimating it, right? It's just a number that gives you, but my focus is more on having a conversation with the team, not like focusing too much on estimation. But those are some of the things that you could use.
Right. Okay. We have extended the time a little bit, and I can see there are certain people who have shown. Well, I'm sorry, Rangarajan, he has posted that we haven't answered any of his questions. Probably we'll be taking it on the Q&A, these question answers later. Yes. So thank you so much for all the attendees joining our session today. It was a wonderful session. We had overwhelmed with the questions, the number of questions we are getting in today. So I know you would be having questions regarding the PDUs and the SUs, and who would be getting the session recording and so much more. So by tomorrow, I will be sending you an email with all the details regarding the PDUs and the SUs, and also the session regarding the session recording and the presentation of this, and also the questions which were posted today. Okay. Let me thank Raj for this excellent session today, and I'm probably hoping we can have another session similar to this probably the next month. Okay. We will keep you all posted regarding this. Thank you, Raj, for a wonderful session today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. And I see a lot of thank yous and, good feedback over there about excellent sessions. I mean, you made this happen. So this is great. The questions are great. And, we tried to answer as many questions as possible, but keep those questions coming, and then, we'll answer. And then hopefully we'll do this, the next few months, a few of these things, and try to answer as many questions as possible.
Definitely. Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.